Hi everybody, Mark Carey here from Steepleview Farm. You know, one of the great pleasures of living in the country is having the opportunity to create your own food, raise your own garden, and to have your own orchard. 21 years ago this year, we planted an orchard of antique apple trees. Those are trees that were prominent and popular in the 1700s, some of the 1800s, but varieties which have fallen out of favor in the commercial market because they just don't look as pretty. Maybe they've got knobs or spots on them, or maybe the skin isn't as shiny and red as the store-bought apples that you typically pick for yourself. Some of these apples don't last as long. Others will last all winter long in a cellar. So we picked apple varieties for their flavor and because they were traditional American apples. Now, many of the traditional American apples were brought over from England. And what you might not know is that besides making pies and applesauce and eating out of hand, most orchards in Colonial America were raised for the purpose of making cider. That's right. You see, the people who came over from England were afraid to drink the water over there. It wasn't clean. It wasn't sanitary. It made them sick. And so they became accustomed to drinking cider. And cider is a juice made from squeezing, or as most people know it, wringing apple pomace or ground apples from the orchard. And in Colonial America, cider was the most popular drink. Those who came over from Britain still carried a certain fear of drinking water, and so cider, a fermented apple juice, was the most popular drink in America. In fact, John Adams, second president of the United States, drank a tankard of apple cider every morning before breakfast. Sometimes farm wages were paid in cider, 3 or 4 pints a day, and almost every farmhouse in New England during the colonial days had a barrel or two of cider in the basement. The orchard was raised for the purpose of making cider. Now, if you go to a farmer's market, you go to the juice that says it's apple cider, odds are it's apple juice. Apple cider is like an apple wine. It is an alcohol drink. The alcohol in the juice helps to preserve it. And so today we're going to talk about how to preserve the apple juice from your orchard by making apple cider and the steps that are required to do that. Now, you can squeeze apple juice and you can drink it and it's just fine as is. If you sell it, I understand that the government will require you to put a label on it telling people that you're drinking unpasteurized apple juice and it could carry pathogens that might make some people sick. But quite frankly, I've been drinking apple juice all my life and have never discovered a problem. We'll talk about how to avoid some of the problems in apple cider on today's little video from Steepleview Farm as we try to bring back to life the great American tradition of making apple cider from apples in our orchard and apples from a couple of neighbors' orchards. And we'll tell you why we do that a little bit later on. So come on and join me. We're getting ready to make some apple cider. It's almost autumn in Kentucky, and we hope you enjoy this video. Now, a couple of words of caution. Some people will say you only buy apples in the store or at a roadside market. If you do, odds are you're buying their best apples. But apples which are usable to make cider include what they call seconds. That is, apples that aren't as pretty, maybe have a blemish, maybe even have a little bite out of them from a bug or a bird. Something that might make the apple otherwise unpalatable for the commercial market, not able to be sold at retail. You'll find that seconds are readily available and usually at about half the price of the first quality apples. But, word of caution, do not pick up apples off of the ground to use to make apple cider. Apples that are on the ground can pick up additional bacteria, those that could make you very sick, including bacteria that you might find in animal feces, E. coli bacteria, and others. So don't pick up apples off the ground. Second reason you don't want to use apples off the ground is there is a bite that a wasp or a fly can give to an apple on the ground, and it leaves behind an enzyme that actually makes the apple juice much more quickly turn to vinegar. And you don't want that. You want sweet apple juice to make your apple cider with, because after all, the fermentation process is the conversion of the sugar in the apple juice to the alcohol in the cider. So don't pick up the apples off of the ground. They can bring bacteria to your mix, they could make you sick, and they might turn to vinegar. I start my process by getting out all of the equipment I'm going to use and then cleaning it up. And cleaning up your equipment is probably one of the first steps you'd take whether you're making apple cider or you're making wine at home or beer or anything else. And most of the equipment that I'm going to use to clean up with, I got from a wine and beer making store. I'm going to use a big tub to wash the apples in, and that big tub will be where we clean off any of the dirt and other debris that have accumulated on the apples and actually wash off a little bit of the wild yeast that's on the skins. I'm also going to clean my apple grinder and both of my food grade buckets, which I'll use to collect the apple pomace coming out of the grinder and the juice coming out of the press. Now, when I clean my equipment, I'm going to use the same equipment I normally use when I'm making wine. I use a brush and a special chemical called Easy Clean. You don't need to rinse it. And I'll clean my buckets and clean everything out with the Easy Clean, and then I will rinse it. I'll also use a sanitizer made up of potassium metabisulfite, which you can pick up at your winemaking store. Just a little bit goes a long way. I'll spritz down some of the equipment with that, and that'll tend to kill off any of the other little bacteria and bugs that might spoil the juice. After washing my apples, I now have about a 5-gallon bucket of clean apples getting ready to go through the grinder. But before I put them through the grinder, this is about a half a bushel, maybe a little bit under. If it's mounded up a little bit, it's right about a half a bushel. Should get just about a gallon of juice, maybe a little under. But before I put them through the grinder, I'm going to go through it. If there's any spots on the apples that I don't really like, I'm just going to carve those out and discard them before I put them in the grinder. Not too many of them are going to have anything that I don't want to run through, and a bruise here and there won't hurt anything. In fact, most guys who've been raising cider, making cider for years, will tell you that before you even grind your apples into a pomace, what you ought to do is put them on concrete or canvas and, as they say, sweat them. That is, let them get a little bit soft before you grind them. They say it makes a sweeter juice and it makes them easier to grind and easier to press. Well, here we are. About 15 minutes later, I've finished grinding all of the apples, and in the meantime, cutting off a couple places where I thought I didn't want them to go through the grinder. We have about 2/3 of a 5-gallon bucket filled with pomace, and that's a good start for our press. I'll just clean up the last little bits out of here, and then I'll start taking it over to the press and show you how that's done. Okay, now we've ground about a half a bushel of apples. As you recall, we started with about a 5-gallon bucket full of apples. Now we've got about 2/3 of a 5-gallon bucket filled with pomace, and it's ready for the press. One little tip: if you're going to grind your apples and make apple cider and use a press, do it outside someplace. It does create a lot of sweet, sticky liquid, and you want to be able to hose it off. It'll keep down on the flies and make the house a lot calmer place to live. Okay, it's starting to get a little bit stiff, so that's about it. We've pressed about all the juice out of there we're going to get. Okay, there we have have it. So out of about 2/3 of a 5-gallon bucket of pomace, we got 4 quarts or 1 gallon of juice with a little bit left over to drink today. So there we have it. First step in making cider, not apple juice, cider. We made apple juice today, cider's yet to come. Stay with us here at Steepleview Farm. We're going to teach you how to make cider the old-fashioned way. Thanks for being with us. Hope you enjoyed. Bye.